Previously on the Lupe Fuentes Experience.
When I'm just around my house, like it's constant accents. So I have a really nice Jamaican accent. There's a really nice, or at least I think they're nice, really nice British accent. I got a really, really wonderful.
Oh, you have to give me a British. You have to give me a British right now, please. Dr. Vanessa Ochoa. Hello, Vanessa.
Hola Lupe, bienvenidos, gracias, feliz viernes, happy Friday. I'm happy to be here in solidarity and in space and conversation with you. I'm excited.
Thank you so much for being here. I know that you're a super busy woman. You do all sorts of things. You're a real leader in our community. And I appreciate your time because I know that you have your hands in a ton of important things that matter to the community, and this is such a big favor to me. Thank you for being here, giving us your knowledge.
Anything for you, Lupe. Anything for you, Lupe.
So Vanessa, oh my God, we have so much to talk about. There is so much happening in the world right now, and I feel like you have so much information that a lot of us Latinos don't know, and we're still learning. I want to be enlightened by your ideas, by your thoughts. Before this interview, I was actually going through your blog from the IPE cloth.
IPE cloth, which IPE stands for Increase Peace Everywhere, which is my clothing company that I have in collaboration with my partner, Dr. G, my husband, my ride or die. And so yeah, you were going through my writing.
Yeah, so
that
I was going through the blog and just reading all your thoughts. It was so beautiful. It was so woke. It was so empowering. I want you to tell me how this came about, the IPE cloth and the idea behind it.
And I appreciate that question. So Increase Peace Everywhere is a clothing company, right? It's a movement. It's meant to be timeless. And why did we develop it? So myself and my partner are both administrators. And so in certain spaces, you have to move in certain ways, right? And we understand that, and we have that responsibility as school administrators. So we're human beings too, and we also need a release of information in different ways. And so Increase Peace Everywhere was a response to being able to speak our mind, my mind as I feel, without any type of strategy. Because I work in an industry, and my role, I have to be very strategic to ensure that folks get service in very specific ways. So Increase Peace Everywhere, Ipe Cloth, allowed us to really speak our voice, to really talk about what is important to us, to me, como una mujer, Chicana, born and raised in Boyle Heights, and to talk about white supremacy, and to talk about the history of white supremacy, my experiences with it, and what I do to counter it, and how do I empower myself, and how do I empower others through cloth, through fashion.
That is so beautiful, and the clothing line is really cool. Like, I need to get a couple of pieces when I get a chance to see you. But this is such a beautiful concept too, especially in our community, because we don't have the same opportunities as white folks, or people that look American and have those stereotypes of, the norm, right? So I want to dive a little bit more into the art and fashion as a form of therapeutic outlet in our community, in Latino community, in the Black community.
It is an outlet. It's therapeutic. It's much needed. And I feel really honored, and I appreciate the fact that I'm able to do this, right? That we have monetary money to be able to invest in this. Because you alluded to a really important point, and that point being that many of us that come from certain communities, we don't have access to these resources because it comes from generational wealth, right? And that's where white supremacy really plays a role in keeping us out of generational wealth. And so the clothing is also countering that white supremacy idea that we cannot be, that I as a mujer, that I as a Chicana cannot be in fashion, and that I cannot be in male-dominated streetwear spaces. So My partner helps me, Dr. G, but I am the face of the company. I am the voice of it. We get together and we collaborate and design. But it is really important to us and our family and our unit to ensure that my voice as a mujer is heard in that aspect of
Mm-hmm.
fashion. That's part of the reason why I wrote my book that I haven't published yet, but it's a conversation about what does it mean to be a Chicana in streetwear from Ball
Mm-hmm.
Heights. What does it mean to be an academic in fashion, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I do have all these
Mm-hmm.
degrees. I was very privileged to be able to go to these spaces because my mother and father, immigrants from Mexico, really pushed education, which counters the stereotype that Latinos don't care about
Yes.
education. They
And a lot
really
of us don't get
struggled.
access to proper education. Education is almost a luxury for a lot of us.
It is almost a luxury. So my goal, my one of my life purpose is to make education accessible to
Mm-hmm.
all, regardless of background, income, right? Because for me, in the role that I play as a college administrator, education is a form of capital. It is
Yes, it is
wealth.
wealth.
It adds to the
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
generational wealth. So, the degrees that I have go beyond the monetary money. It gives me opportunities to be in spaces and in places where sometimes people can't be in because they don't have the ability or the connection to the institutions that I attended.
Yeah.
And so that's my goal, to get more people that look like me, that sound like me, that have my accent, that move their hands when I speak, um, that are the essence of a Chicana, of a Latina, to be in those spaces, right? That they
Vanessa, you're
belong.
such an inspiration as a woman, as a Latina, as a brown woman. It's so inspiring to see you. It's so motivating. Like when I met you, a lot of doors in my mind open that yes, I can do things as a Latino woman. Not because my family doesn't come from that, it doesn't mean that I cannot do it or that that is not available for me. Yes. Yes, I love the encouragement that you give all of us. I want to know a little bit more about, I mean, we're friends and I know you very well, and we have had different conversations about all sorts of things. I have learned so much from you.
Yeah,
But for my fans, for my online friends, I want them to get to know you a little bit more and understand like the power that you hold. Please tell me a little bit about your work and who you are as a person.
well, that's great. So I always start my testimonio, my narrative, with always honoring my ancestors. And so my ancestors are critical to who I am as a person, right? So my parents are from Mexico, from Zacatecas and Michoacan, and they came to Boyle Heights in 1977. And with power and struggle, my mom is a fashion
She
designer.
was.
So she opened up a bridal business, right, in 1977 in
Wow.
Boyle Heights, and designed very glamorous vestidos, dresses. And so for me, I reflect now that I have my own clothing company, is that fashion is in my DNA. And I talk about that in my book, right? My father from Michoacan, and we spent summers in Michoacan all the time to ensure that we didn't lose our language and to ensure that I know who I am. Because if you don't know who you are, and we always tell this to our son, if you don't know who you are, you're like a tree with no roots, right? Marcus Garvey says that. And so I want to give props to my good friend Tyson Amir, who wrote Black Boy Poems, who talks about identity. If you don't know who you are, what are you rooted in? And so I come from a history and legacy of inmigrantes in Mexico, but I also come from a place called Boyle Heights. And for folks that don't know Boyle Heights, it is literally 2 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. And it's a place that's experiencing different levels of gentrification, while at the same time experiencing great levels of neglect and trauma because of COVID
Yeah.
19. And what do I mean by that? We have a large segment of essential workers in Boyle Heights. So there's been a lot of death and tragedy in Boyle Heights when the pandemic hit March 2020. I'm surrounded by essential workers. And so I've been really reflective in that, right? Because I have the privilege to be able to work from home and seeing the mujeres and the men going every day to work has made me really reflective and that much more in tune with the power of
Mm-hmm.
Borough Heights. This community is also very much centered. It is now like 90 some percent Latinx,
Mm-hmm.
Latino, Latina, but it used to be a community of Jewish folks, of Japanese folks, of different types of
Mm-hmm.
folks, right? But right now we're undergoing a lot of trauma from COVID and also lack of access to resources,
Exactly.
such as
I
those
feel
that
like we
we
don't
participate.
realize as a full community in Los Angeles that the Latino community is in big part the ones that take care, caretakers,
Yes,
or we do a lot of those jobs, and it just comes so naturally for us because generations and generations of us serving. That's the truth.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what you said. We're serving. So what I ask of your fans too is that when you go into spaces and you see sensual workers, that you acknowledge them for who they are, that you give thanks to them. Not, I'm not necessarily saying verbally, but give thanks for the fact that they
Mm-hmm.
exist. Because if not for them, your Trader Joe's would not be open. If not for them, the hospitals would not be open. Because these are the people that are the nurses, the doctors as well, but they're also the people that are cleaning the restrooms that you go
Yes.
to during a pandemic. And so we need to acknowledge the power of essential workers, right? Because without them, we would be in a lot of danger. And I think that's something that didn't really make its way into conversation in COVID
Mm-hmm.
19, right? We also experienced a heavy um, lack of access to vaccinations when they first came out. And considering that Borough Heights has a heavy essential worker population, it makes sense in a white supremacist world, but it doesn't make sense, right? But it's all part of the plan. And so that's what I do in my work. You asked me, my work as a dean in food services at East Los Angeles
Mm-hmm.
College. I have the power and the privilege to oversee all of the equity centers. So I support the Center for Formerly Incarcerated Individuals. I support the Center for Undocumented People. I support the Center for Queer People, for Black scholars, for scholar athletes. So I get to be with people in a community that also empower me to be free and
You are
human.
right in the
And I
front
have
line
great,
of change, especially
yes,
cultivating young minds that are probably going to change our world tomorrow. It's really important.
and they are, and that's an honor, Lupe, when I get all these emails and texts and DMs from previous students that have either transferred from East Los Angeles College or I teach at Mount St. Mary's where I'm a professor. I get these beautiful emails of how my class or the space they were with me really allow them to be rooted in who they are. Because at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in this. If you are not rooted in your identity, you are lost, which is why curriculum development is so critical, which is why people like you, Lupe, need to develop curriculum that reflects your interest in passion for music, for example. Those are the things that are really critical when we have these conversations about what are young people learning in school. It is not an error that in schools in America, classes that deal with ethnic studies are not allowed in certain spaces. It is just now that some schools are allowing courses in Black African American history, in Chicanx, Latinx history, just now in
Wow.
2021, because there's been an intentional goal of erasing history. Because if you know who you are, you have power.
So,
And
how
so that
this decolonization of our history is happening?
you bring up a really important word, decolonial work. What does it mean to be colonized within the United States of America? And maybe a lot of your fans went through the American educational system, which is a colonial educational
System.
curriculum,
Yeah.
which many of us in the circles that I run with, we talk about the violence of education.
Oh, let's talk
So as
about
a
this. Yes,
decolonial,
it's
yes,
important.
the violence. What do I mean by violence? Again, when you're stripped of facts, intentionally stripped of facts, which is what a lot of the American educational system is based on, you feel like you have no power. So it makes sense that we only have access to
You
certain
have no
things,
power.
right? So
We
when
have
I
no history. We
no
cannot
power, no
relate. We
exactly,
don't have stories.
exactly.
Yes, it's true. Mm-hmm.
That's why decolonial work is very much centered and rooted in testimonial and testimony. I encourage all your fans to get in touch with their testimony of who they are as they begin to have dialogues with themselves about what does it mean to be decolonial. And part of the process to be decolonial is getting to know who you are, because the US educational system only teaches you certain parts of history.
How can I start to really learn my roots and where I come from right now in 2021?
And I appreciate that question, because you're asking me, how do you do this? How do you operationalize decolonial work,
Yes.
right? How do I do it on the streets every day? And how do you do it? You do it by surrounding yourself with like-minded people, finding circles where testimony, there's círculos going on all over. You can find them on Instagram, right? It's how you use Instagram. Instagram is a really powerful tool with a lot of decolonial work going on through Instagram. There's a lot of Zooms that a lot of my homies are doing talking about decolonial education. That's one way. The other thing is I promote reading. I also promote films, watching, music, as which is heavy with you, Lupe, right?
Yes.
Music is critical. I did send you the video that right now I'm using as a teaching tool for my son. It's called Gold by Ruby Ibarra and Ala J. Bosco, which talks about the importance of really respecting your skin color
Vanessa, that is so
and not
beautiful.
engaging who you are.
Yes, respecting our own skin color and also within our race and community, we have so many different shades, and there is racism also within our community. Between people of color. Let's talk a little bit about that. I want to learn
Yeah,
more.
it's called colorism.
Colorism.
Colorism, right? The idea of colorism is very heavy in Latino novelas, right? In the Spanish novelas. What do we tend to see? You see the same trends that are set up in American media, which is light-skinned people hold certain roles, and dark-skinned people will hold the role, at least in the novelas, in the soap operas, will hold the role of the cleaning lady
It's true.
or the driver,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, how do you see it? So for the fans, how do you see it when you travel to other countries? You see it as who is facing you in a hotel. It's really intentional when you travel and you see certain kind of skin colors at the face of a hotel. It takes a lot of work. Let me tell you, it is exhausting to counter white supremacy on an everyday. You have to be really intentional in your acts, in how you move, in how you speak to counter it, because it's everywhere. It's pervasive. That's why it's so powerful. And sometimes you don't even know that you're facing it because you're so
It's
used
so
to
ingrained
walking.
in everyday life.
Yes. But the beauty of social media, the beauty of spaces like the one you're providing me, the music, is that more and more folks now in 2021, because of everything that's going on, Trump leaving office, the unfortunate deaths that have now been caught on camera over and over at the hands of police, are making people be much more reflective. And I am a very hopeful person, and so I see hope in youth. And I see that the youth, whether it be through social media, they're pushing. And you're seeing more spaces, more decolonial spaces being created, whether it be physically
Or virtually.
or on
I
Zoom
agree.
with this pandemic.
And especially right now with the access that we have of technology,
Mm-hmm.
things are coming out to the surface. People have to be more
Mm-hmm.
transparent, like the police. Nowadays, you can film somebody, and that is such a big, powerful tool that I encourage everybody to use. Yeah.
And let me say this: you have the right to film an interaction with law enforcement, so long as it doesn't infringe on their investigation. And that's where you ride this fine line, because who tells you if it's infringing? It's usually the police
Right.
officer, right? So I do encourage you to take care of each other. If you see something, say something. Um, I'm really big on, I'll film. I had an incident recently where I saw some injustice being done to one of my neighbors. And I went outside in my PJs and I filmed LAPD. And the police officer did ask me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Estoy asegurando que mi vecino esté
Oh.
bien. I am ensuring that my neighbor is okay. So I said, I'm doing it for your safety, officer, and for the safety of my neighbor and community. And he said, okay. And that changed the
It
interaction.
changed the
The
narrative
neighbor
on
came,
his mind as well.
it changed the entire
Mm-hmm.
narrative, right? Because I can speak to Floral Heights. There is a certain kind of situation and policing that happens, right? I have a whole piece that I wrote called um, Leading While Brown, because it refers to this idea of driving while black or brown, right? For the most part, black men and brown men tend to be stopped more often than
Oh,
white
yes.
men. And in the case of my neighbor, he was stopped because he fits a certain mold, again, right? Skin color, dark, was wearing a particular kind of hat. And so there is these gang associations that LAPD tries to do, which is
The
unfair.
generalization.
Yes, the generalization, exactly. So policing is something that I also really is heavy with me because my partner too has been um, victimized by police brutality in the Bay Area and Oakland, right? And that has made itself into his testimony, into his narrative, and it helps him when he works with youth because he also works with youth. You know, in Espanol we have tenemos un dicho, we have a saying, right? Um, estar educado. There's a difference between being like educated, educado, and then there's school. And so this is where the power of the immigrant story comes in. Many of our families, they have educated us, les han educado a nosotros to be powerful, to be who we are. And that you don't learn in schools because it goes back to what I told you, the colonial curriculum. So our families are so important to our foundation. And I know that in the Latino community, sometimes we hide certain things. We don't talk about certain things. And so I encourage your fans to stop, reflect, and see how they can change their narratives in their spaces, right? If that's not something that's common in their spaces, how can they start to change that to make it a space where their children feel free to say certain things,
Yes. And free to be.
right? Because
And free to
exactly, right?
take
When
the
we talk about,
opportunities, because sometimes we feel like we're not worthy. I gotta tell you, and this is for personal experience, okay? I am an immigrant, okay? I was born in Colombia. When I first came to the United States, I didn't speak any English, so it's been a huge, amazing learning experience. And when I got here, I realized that sometimes, and I have accomplished a lot, I am very grateful for my experiences, but I realized that sometimes I will sell myself short because I just felt so lucky to be in the room. I just felt so lucky to be included. And that happened to us because we don't see people like that look like us in those roles of power, in those roles of leadership. So psychologically, this is almost like generational trauma. We feel like we're not worthy, we're not white enough, we're not educated enough in our minds. We're not, we still need to do more work to get there. I feel like that all the time as a Latino woman in Hollywood. And how can we start changing the narrative to feel worthy of those roles, to feel worthy of those opportunities?
you alluded to a really, you said, this trauma in academic research, but I'm going to cover it in our life research. A lot of people have been writing about intergenerational trauma, and that's what you just said. You see, we are part of our ancestors. You cannot deny
Yes.
that. And so with that too, right, with the power and the advocacy also comes the trauma that our ancestors have experienced at the hands of white supremacists. And they come out in these interesting ways, right, that you just alluded to. So how do you counter that? By acknowledging it first and foremost. There's a lot of writing now and a lot of storytelling that is acknowledging the trauma, the intergenerational trauma that we bring to the table. You have to acknowledge it first before you can understand it and work with it to go beyond it. Never denying it, right? Never denying it, but going beyond it. And so that comes really understanding that first and foremost. I'll go back again to the reading, right? That's really big for me. One of my favorite books is Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator who came from wealth to then became very poor in Brazil and then became the Secretary of Education in Brazil. But his book, the premise is that we must really understand the oppression that we're living in order to be freed from it. But we also have to be very careful that once we become liberated, that we don't become the oppressor.
Oh, yes.
I'll say that again. That once we become liberated, we do not become the oppressor. And what do I mean by this? I have been seeing this a lot in my community because we have people that look like me with privilege and education that we call white aspiring, that will use their power for oppression. And that's what Freire alludes to. Be very careful. Because as a liberated person of color, you have a responsibility to your community.
Yes.
And some people lose themselves along the way.
Yes. Exactly. I mean,
because they get access to places, right? They get access to money.
yes.
They get access to benefits that they never had before. And as a person of color, these are the conversations we need to be having. I have this conversation often with, I'll give you an example, with athletes who in some situations come from low-income families who then get these contracts that are multi-million. What does a young person with multi-million dollars do, right? If they're not given the mentorship and the guidance, then sometimes they lose themselves, which is one of the reasons why I appreciate someone like Jay-Z in him being a sports agent, because he makes it his intentional goal to ensure that the folks that are signed under him or with him understand how to manage their money. Because we live in a capitalistic world. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. So the currency is powerful, but it's how you use your currency, right? So we also need mentorship from folks like you, Lupe, from other folks, that when we come into something, how do we use that something, whatever that is, to empower and not spend all our money?
Especially, we have the responsibility. We have the responsibility with our community, with our ancestors, to change the world, to change the narrative. Yes, and to guide our own people, the ones of us that have been lucky enough to reach goals and accomplish things. I feel like I have a huge sense of responsibility, especially with women. I'm so passionate about women because my mom was a single mother, and I saw her going through struggles, and being a Latino woman and not having an education. She struggled a lot, and that in consequence affected my life. So I feel so passionate about, especially women, Latino women, women of color, women at risk. I think we have so much potential. We're so creative. We're so powerful. We just need the opportunities and the mentorship.
Yeah, mentorship is key. I've had a lot of amazing mentors. I also want to say something to your fans, that if whatever I'm saying feels overwhelming, my intent is not to overwhelm, but let me give you this tip. And this is what I tell students all the time, because they always ask, Doctora Ochoa, what kind of change can I make? You can start small in your community. It's that one step that you take that really creates impact. So don't feel that you have to go and be everywhere. I encourage you to select something you're super passionate about and focus on that, because that will create a larger change with time. So I'm giving that as a tip so that people don't walk away feeling from this
What to
conversation
do.
like, what to do, how do I start? You start by first exploring your passion. Pick one. And from there, find out how you can amplify that passion to impact yourself and those around you.
Beautiful.
That's the advice I would give.
Beautiful. Do thy neighbor as you wish to be done to you. Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. So, what is Vanessa Ochoa excited about? I know that you usually have your hands in a million fires. What is coming up that you are really excited about?
I am really actually I'm really excited about. I'm working on a article right now, a co-article around how we use hip hop in
Mm-hmm.
leadership. I'm a big hip hop fanatic. I use it in my teaching, but I also use it a great deal in my leadership. And what do I mean by that? I reference the music, but I also reference the other elements of hip hop, from breakdancing to MCing, right, to DJing. So this article has me working with two other leaders, um, one in Chicago and one in Alabama. And we're writing an article around how we use hip hop in our spaces, and that's important because hip hop has been co-opted. I'll say that again. Hip hop has been co-opted globally. So we want to respect
Mm-hmm.
hip hop. For me, hip hop is a female. So I respect hip hop by writing about her and by showing folks the power of her.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes she's just used as a money maker.
Yes.
But hip hop at its foundation, it is a liberation tool.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I'm super excited about, which then makes its way into Ipe cloth, because a lot of the stories, the things I write about, makes its way into how we design, right? So we just had a big drop to acknowledge King Lapu Lapu, which is, my son is named Lapu Lapu,
Mm-hmm.
but Lapu Lapu was the king of the Philippines that was one of the only individuals that pushed against Spanish colonization, and he helped his
Mm-hmm.
people. So we just celebrate the 500 years of the Battle of
Mm-hmm.
Mactan, and we celebrated our son by doing a Lapu Lapu drop for my clothing
That's
cycle.
such a
So that
beautiful
I'm excited
tribute.
about.
Mm-hmm.
It's to honor,
Yes.
it's to honor the Philippine community, because my husband is Filipino, and it's to honor my son and to show him that he is legacy, that that's his ancestor.
Beautiful.
So those are some of the things that I'm excited about, and I'm also excited, even though it's very tiring work, to continue to push for Boyle Heights, because we need support here. So I implore your fans, we need support to talk about the lack of access to sanitation, the neglect that this majority Latino community um, is facing.
Boyle Heights is such an historical place in Los Angeles. We need to protect it.
Yeah,
We need to conserve it.
yeah. We need to continue to cultivate it, right? My family's been here now over 60 years, and so I want to cultivate it. And I'm one of those individuals that when it comes to conversations around change, I'm open to change, but I need people that have been at the forefront of the community to be part of the conversation, right? Because this word gentrification, right? So when I talk about gentrification, change is one of those things that is always going to happen, but it's how the changes are delivered. And also, my hope is that as more people that look like me, that are from the neighborhood, begin to gain generational wealth, that we reinvest that wealth in our communities, whether that be South Central, that's being gentrified heavily, Inglewood, that's being gentrified heavily, or Boyle Heights is being gentrified. That rather that we push against the gentrification in the form of having people that look like me, our histories, we are the ones that are investing in our businesses.
If anybody of the fans of our community want to get involved in the change, how could they get involved? How could they find you?
Thank you for that. So they can find me on social media. My Instagram page for the community is Boyle Heights Amor. I also have the Boyle Heights Amor Community Space Instagram, and you can find me as well writing on ebaycloth.com, which is where I do a lot of the writing for our movement. So you can find me in those spaces on social media, and I'm always on social media, so I will respond, because I believe it is my responsibility to engage in conversation with people, because that's how we begin to really get to know each other and dialogue and understand that we come from different places and spaces, but at the end of the day, I feel, and I'm a very hopeful person, we all want to experience love. And that's my goal. Like, how do we create community for folks, right, that might feel alone? So I work with students that are experiencing different things. And so one of my goals always from a leadership standpoint is, how do I create community with the programs that I help oversee? How do I create community in Boyle Heights? How do I create community in clothing? Right? Those are the things that I'm always reflective on.
Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the wisdom. Good luck with your amazing clothing line. And if anybody wants to find Vanessa, make sure to go to their social media, Boyle Heights Amor on Instagram. You're gonna find all sorts of news, work, phrases, comments, ideas, projects. Get involved. Lots of love for my sister.
Appreciate everybody. Thank you.